it's heartbreaking. I mean, it don't have to be your child. I mean, it's a child in general. So anyone's child is really heartbreaking. And my heart goes out to the family, really.
I just got no remorse for a person that do that. That's all I got to say about that.
I think that it's horrible that anybody that can do anything like that to a child, they deserve the most punishment that they can get. And that hurts me to my heart, and I didn't even know the baby.
A phone rings inside the Aiken County 911 center. Just before 9 o'clock at night, a woman's voice comes through, already unsteady, already fighting to hold itself together.
Emergency.
Man, my bad. I can't find my baby. Yes, ma'am. She was outside playing, and I came out here after cooking dinner a little bit, and I'm looking for her, but I don't see her nowhere.
All right. How old is this baby?
She's 4.
All right. What was she wearing?
She has on pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, and she had in pink beads. She had braids.
Is she black, white, or Hispanic?
She's mixed.
Okay. How long ago did you see her, ma'am? When was the last time you saw her?
I just came out here like no less than 20 or 30 minutes ago. I went in the house to cook dinner, and I told her it's time to come in once it starts getting dark. And when I came out here, I can't find her.
Just take a breath for me, okay? I already have them on the way to you, okay? Do you know where she might be heading? Okay, you have any family or friends that live around the area?
No, but she usually try to chase our chickens to catch them, and I've been looking through the woods to try to see if I see her, but I don't see her nowhere.
What's your name?
My name is Javeayah Harris.
What's her name?
Javeayah Harris.
Harris? I couldn't hear the first name.
Javeayah is spelled Javeayah. And I wasn't out here. I'm 39 weeks pregnant. I can't keep up with her like that.
Okay. And what? Anybody else out there with her? Like that was out there with her? Any friends, kids playing with her?
The way our yard is set up, it's nothing but the dogs and the chickens right here at the back.
All right. Does she have any health issues? Any mental issues? Anything like that?
They suspect that she was autistic, but she's just now turning 4, so they don't have no diagnosis all the way.
Okay.
But she's very smart, though. She don't seem autistic.
Does she talk?
Yeah. She can carry a full conversation.
Okay. You didn't see any vehicles before you went inside or anything like that?
No, but what worries me is these crackheads that walk in his house behind the house. I don't know. I've always felt weird about them, and I don't know. Hello?
I'm still here, ma'am. Give me just a second.
My call might be breaking up because of where we at.
Okay. What's a good callback number for you, ma'am?
Ma'am, I don't have one. My phone is not on, but I can still call 911.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Okay, I'm on the way to you. Just to confirm, where was she in the house when you saw her last?
No, she wasn't in the house, ma'am. She been playing outside today. And she asked me, can she play for a little bit more before it got dark, and I said yes. And I literally, her bath water is in the tub, ran, and dinner is cooking, and I came out here to get her, and I can't even find her.
Okay, is there a certain place she likes to play outside?
Usually in the chicken coop, and that's usually where I find her every day. And I just looked in here, and she's not in here.
Okay. Is there any bodies of water nearby?
I don't know, ma'am. Me and my husband just now purchased in this house. I don't know about this area much, but it's not a good area. I'll tell you that. It's not good.
Okay, you say you searched the woods. Is that behind your house?
Yes, it's like a pathway right behind my house. And we usually take the dog sometimes in the woods to just let them run. And she'll come, so I know she knows about the woods. And but I look down the same pathway that we walk, and I do not see her.
Okay, and you said she was wearing pink Minnie Mouse pajamas. Anything else you may be wearing?
Her beads are pink.
Beats are pink?
Yeah, she's got braids. I mean, I don't know if she got on Crocs or with shoes, because she just puts on play shoes, but I don't, ma'am, it's not no way that she could have got far.
All right. Do you have any neighbors around the area that you're familiar with she might be going to?
No, we don't talk to none of these people. None of these people, because they all mostly do drugs. I don't associate myself with that.
Every detail lands the way it's supposed to land. It sounds exactly like what it claims to be: a young mother, 39 weeks pregnant, panicking because her daughter has wandered off somewhere in the dark. Within the hour, deputies are combing the yard. Within a day, the case has become a multi-agency search spanning thousands of acres. Within 4 days, it will become something almost nobody in Aiken County, South Carolina, was prepared to hear out loud, because investigators would come to believe that everything in that phone call, every single detail, every tremor in that voice was a story, not a mistake, not confusion, a story built in advance and delivered on command. And by the time it was told, the little girl at the center of it had already been gone for weeks. This is the case of Javeayah Harris. If this is the first time you're hearing her name, stay with us, because what came out in the arrest warrants is worse than almost anything this channel has ever covered. And if you've been following along since the beginning, this is the update you've been waiting for. The moment the pieces investigators have been quietly assembling behind closed doors finally became public record, laid out in black and white, in language a court had to use because there was no gentler way to say it. Before we go further, a warning, because we take this seriously every single time. This case involves the death of a 4-year-old child, and later in this video we will describe, factually and without sensationalizing any of it, what investigators say happened to her body after she died. If that is not something you're in a place to sit with today, it is completely all right to step away and come back another time. There is no version of this story that isn't heavy. We are not going to pretend otherwise, and we are not going to soften it into something it wasn't either. If you're staying, welcome. If this is your first time at this channel, subscribe now, because we're going to follow this case all the way through trial, and we do not disappear on the people who choose to sit with us through cases like this one. Let's begin at the beginning, not with the warrants, not with the press conference, not even with the phone call. Let's begin with her. Before any of this had a case number attached to it, before Aiken County had ever heard the name Javeayah Harris, before helicopters were circling over Fairfield County and reporters were setting up cameras outside a detention center, she was just a 4-year-old girl living in a small house on Hillsborough Street with a chicken coop out back and a stretch of woods behind the property. She was 3.5 feet tall. She weighed around 40 pounds. Small enough that the number, when you actually stop and picture it, is almost impossible to hold in your head next to everything else in this case. She wore her hair in braids finished off with pink beads, and pink, by every single account from people who knew her, was her color, not a passing preference. Her color. Minnie Mouse wasn't just a cartoon character she liked watching. It was closer to a personality trait. If there was a Minnie Mouse item anywhere nearby, a shirt, a toy, a set of pajamas, she was probably already holding it or already asking for it. People who spent time around her, neighbors, family, friends, even a reporter who later interviewed her father, used the same handful of words without being prompted to. Bright, sharp, talkative, the kind of 4-year-old who could carry a full conversation with an adult and hold her own in it, who noticed things other children her age didn't always catch. She didn't have the instinct most parents spend years trying to instill in small children. That wariness around strangers, that pulling back from people she didn't know. She said yes ma'am and no ma'am, yes sir and no sir, to nearly everyone she met, and by every account, she meant it every single time. She had been raised, at least outwardly, to be polite, respectful, and unafraid of the world around her. There was an ongoing conversation among the adults in her life about whether she might be on the autism spectrum. She had reportedly shown some signs early on, but no formal diagnosis had ever been completed, in part because evaluations of that kind typically can't be finalized until a child reaches a certain age. Her father would later push back, almost offensively, against early media descriptions that painted her as nonverbal or withdrawn. He insisted she was sharper than any label being reached for. She talked, he said, better than he did. She could hold a conversation better than most adults he knew. That detail. A 4-year-old who spoke easily, who noticed the world around her, who greeted strangers without a flicker of fear, would go on to become one of the most quietly devastating facts of this entire case. Because a child like that, a child who is present, verbal, and visible in every ordinary sense of the word, does not simply vanish from a neighborhood's collective memory without someone eventually noticing. And yet,
is still missing. The search for her body is still ongoing. Her parents are still behind bars, and that call, like you said, Zaina, we now know is not true. We had been searching for the 911 call. We requested that last week. We now have the warrants as well. You listened to the full 911 call, so did I. Break that down and break down what these warrants say, Sydney.
Well, Will, in that call, you hear Javeayah's mom describe her to police. The description that we got was the same one that she gave deputies that night. She called 911 just before 9 o'clock Tuesday night, telling dispatchers her 4-year-old daughter had been playing outside and vanished. And what followed was a massive search. Thousands of acres, multiple agencies, days of looking for a little girl in dangerous summer heat. Arrest warrants released today tell a very different story than that 911 call. The warrants use stark language, saying both parents showed, quote, extreme indifference to human life. The warrants state that the parents failed to seek medical attention for Javeayah after she suffered an injury from physical abuse at the hands of Herring. The warrants also say the abuse happened between May 1st and June 15th, meaning Javeayah may have been dead for weeks before that 911 call was ever made.
Oh, my God.
Okay, I'm on the way to you. Just to confirm, where was she in the house when you saw her last?
No, she wasn't in the house, ma'am. She been playing outside today. And she asked me, can she play for a little bit more before it got dark, and I said yes. And I literally, her bath water is in the tub, ran, and dinner is cooking, and I came out here to get her, and I can't even find her.
Now, in the arrest warrants, Will, Herring admits to disposing Javeayah's body somewhere else. And as you'd mentioned earlier, both of Javeayah's parents remain behind bars tonight, both charged with homicide by child abuse, her mom facing a charge of filing a false police report.
Now, I want to go over the 911 call. It's around 5 minutes long, and if you had the chance to listen to that, it sounds like a real 911 call to dispatcher. She's very upset. The mother is very upset, saying that Javeayah had actually been outside playing with the chickens in the chicken coop. We knew that from the incident report that we got last week or over the weekend. And she also said that Javeayah had asked her to go inside and actually went inside and said that she wanted to play. So she had this story that she was telling this 911 dispatcher. And the most shocking part of this is that this whole story is not true. She gave an entire description of Javeayah, saying that she had pink beads in her hair, was wearing Minnie Mouse pajamas. She was very smart, very talkative, and was great at having conversations. So she had this entire story, said she was 39 weeks pregnant, couldn't keep up with her, was searching in the woods, and she needed help. She was unsure of some of the people that may have been around her house. But again, we do know that this story was not true. Again, she's charged with filing a false police report, and also in that warrant saying that she had disposed of her body in an area outside of Aiken County. And I think one of the parts of the warrants, and you pointed this out already, was that May 1st to June 15th mark for the homicide by child abuse charge. So again, Javeayah could have been gone for weeks before that 911 call was made. We know the sheriff telling us that Javeayah had likely been deceased for a month.
And another thing that I want to bring up, Will, is I was back out in the neighborhood today talking with neighbors of Javeayah, and I know one question that we had and many people at home had was, did Javeayah ever live in that house? I spoke to 3 neighbors today. 2 live across the street and 1 lives next door, and they said that they did see Javeayah at that house, but they had not seen her in about a month or 2.
The other part of this warrant, I'll read it for you. I just want to make sure I'm getting the verbiage right, because you said there were some strong and powerful words in this warrant. They also mentioned that they did not seek medical attention for Javeayah after knowing that Javeayah had suffered injury which was obtained from physical abuse. Again, that charge, you see it right here on your screen. It's homicide by child abuse, and then the mother also charged with filing that false police report. The father is not charged with that at this time. But if you look at the father's warrant as well, it's interesting the verbiage that they use in his, and they say that he is charged with the homicide by child abuse, but it was from the victim's mother. So it clearly states that the victim's mother had done that child abuse and had caused those injuries to Javeayah, and then the mother was also charged in that warrant with disposing of Javeayah's body. So that gives us an insight as to what exactly happened and who did what in this case as well, according to these warrants.
Absolutely. And reading these warrants today, Will, both of us getting a picture of what actually happened according to these warrants. I go back to that news conference that Sheriff Marty Sawyer had, where he was telling us the news that no one wanted to hear, that they believed Javeayah had been dead for at least a month. And he had one line that stood out to me where he said that by the time that 911 call was made, it was already too late for Javeayah. And certainly these warrants give us a better picture of that. 2 different stories between that 911 call from her mother and what these warrants have to say as well.
It's truly hard to listen to. If you have a chance to listen to it, this is on our website as well, WRDW.com. And going back to the 911 call, there's the father's side to all of this. I interviewed with him on Thursday over the phone. That's also on our website if you haven't checked that out. And again, he gave an entire story as to what happened the day that Javeayah went missing. We still don't know if that's true or not, because we don't know if he was at the house at the time of that 911 call. He tells us he wasn't. He was out running some errands, went to 3 or 4 stores to get candy for Javeayah, get some alcohol, get gas, and some Black and Milds, and then had seen police and then ended up back home. But I asked him, did you know what happened to Javeayah? Do you know anything? He told me, no, sir, I don't. Again, charged with homicide by child abuse in this case. We have the full 911 call on our website, again, if you haven't checked that out. We also have the warrants. We'll have more throughout this evening, Zaina.
Sydney and Will, thank you. Just hard to listen to that 911 call, hard to read those warrants. You just question, you just don't know how a parent could do such a thing. The big question still remains, where exactly is Javeayah? Your Meredith Anderson has been at the search site for Javeayah's body at the Fairfield and Chester County line. Meredith, what's the latest search efforts looking like?
The search for the body of 4-year-old Javeayah Harris is concentrated here in rural Fairfield County. To give you an idea, it's about 2 hours outside of Augusta, and no one is getting in this area at all. You can see they've got the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office blocking it off. So really the only people coming and going are investigators. And I'm told that this is an access to Debutary Creek, which feeds into a much larger body of water. Something to note about this body of water, and it's well known around for fishermen in the area because it's really good fishing for crappie. The reason it's good is because it's filled with stumps. The Rocky Creek Pond that is not too far from here is nicknamed Stumpy Pond by a lot of the locals. So that goes to show you the water is kind of treacherous for boats, good for fishing, but there's lots of places for fish to cover. So that could mean some clues into what investigators are having to go by. Something else here too, we have been here for a couple of hours. It's been raining, it's been thundering. That is important because we know drone teams are in the area, and because of the weather that we've been facing today, perhaps drones have not been able to go up in the air. A note about this location too. This is a location where Javeayah Harris's family started showing up Saturday. I was here Saturday. I tracked the area through the back of the tail number on SLED's helicopter. It was up in the sky. It was circling the water here. So I hopped in the car and I drove here. And I wasn't the only one. Javeayah Harris's family members were coming here. They don't live too far from here. And they had seen the news about their loved one on Facebook, on social media, and this was after the sheriff's office made the announcement that she is likely dead. cars coming and going all day today. Not really sure which one, a lot of them unmarked, but we've seen a lot of DNR and a lot of the local Fairfield County Sheriff's Office coming and going here today. But again, back to her family. Once they found out about her likely death, they didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to do, and they wanted information. So they came here looking for answers. And today, we're getting more answers. We got a copy of the warrants, and today we learned that both the mother and the father have confessed. At least that's what the warrant said, and that the mother confessed to disposing of Javeayah's body. That is of particular interest because, as far as we know, this is the only area that they are searching right now. And I can tell you, after being out of here Saturday, we saw law enforcement from a bunch of different agencies, but DNR seemed to be the most pronounced, I guess you could say, agency out here. I saw multiple boats that were being pulled out of here with trailers, ATVs, those were on trailers being pulled out. There was a rather large mobile command unit. So this appears to be the spot where they are searching for her body. We will continue monitoring this today. I'm trying to get a look at the cars that are coming and going in the different agencies, but we're told that Aiken County is the lead on this investigation. So none of them have been able to give me any information, but even more sadly so, none of them have been able to give any of the information to Javeayah Harris's family members as well. But for now, that is the latest here in rural Fairfield County, South Carolina. Meredith Anderson, on your side.
Meredith, thank you. And here at home this weekend, the community coming together to show their support for Javeayah at a vigil last night. People showing their support with candles and through prayer. They also have created a memorial right outside of her home with stuffed animals, balloons, and candles. And it's very nice to see the community just coming together for this little girl that they don't.
Michelle's replies reportedly avoided answering the question directly, and at one point allegedly included an old video Javeayah played at a park. As though that settled the matter, if that reporting holds up under scrutiny. It places that exchange squarely inside the same 6-week window the warrants describe. Someone, somewhere outside that household, was already asking where she was, and the answers being given, according to this reporting, were already part of a cover story that had begun weeks before a single phone call was ever placed to 911. This is a piece of the case that investigators, prosecutors, and even the sheriff leading the search would later say they found almost impossible to process, even with decades of experience between them. Not a single incident, not one impulsive, catastrophic moment that spiraled out of control, an instant and could never be undone, a sustained, deliberate period, over a month, during which two adults living under the same roof as a 4-year-old chose, day after day, not to seek help for her, and then chose, in the weeks that followed her death, to make absolutely certain no one outside that house ever found out. That is the backdrop sitting quietly underneath the phone call that would eventually mobilize hundreds of law enforcement officers, dozens of volunteers, a national television audience, and an entire community, all of them searching in 90-plus degree South Carolina heat for a little girl who was never going to be found where they were looking because she had not been there for weeks. Shortly before 9 o'clock on the evening of June 30th, 2026, Michelle Herring picked up her phone and called 911. She told the dispatcher she was at 39 Hillsborough Street and could not find her daughter. She said Javeayah had been playing outside while she cooked dinner, and that when she stepped out to bring her in, as it started getting dark, the little girl was simply gone. Over the next several minutes, Michelle gave a description that was, by any objective measure, remarkably precise. Pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, pink beads woven into her braided hair, possibly Crocs, though she said she wasn't entirely certain, since Javeayah tended to just grab whatever shoes happened to be closest to the door on her way outside. She mentioned the chicken coop specifically, describing it as the spot where she said she always found her daughter playing, and told the dispatcher she had already checked there and Javeayah wasn't in it. She brought up a wooded path behind the house, a route she said the family sometimes used to walk their dogs, and said she had already walked down herself, calling out with no luck. She disclosed, without being directly asked, that she was 39 weeks pregnant, a detail she offered as an explanation for why she couldn't cover much ground searching on her own. She disclosed that her phone had no active service beyond emergency calls, which meant investigators would have no way to reach her directly once the call ended, a detail that would later matter because it meant any follow-up contact that night would have to happen strictly in person. And notably, she raised the subject of unfamiliar people she described walking the path behind the property, characterizing them in a way that gestured toward a potential outside threat before any question about other people in the area had even been asked of her. That last detail is one that behavioral analysts and prosecutors who later reviewed the recorded call flagged specifically and repeatedly. A caller volunteering a potential alternative suspect, entirely unprompted, early in a call, is a recognized behavioral marker that investigators are trained to notice. It shifts the frame of the entire conversation. It plants a direction for the search before deputies have even arrived on scene, before investigators have had the chance to form their own independent theory of what might have happened. The call ran approximately 5 minutes. The dispatcher stayed composed throughout, methodically working to the standard questions any missing child call requires. Deputies were already en route before the call had even ended, and what followed, within 72 hours, would grow into a search involving the FBI, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, the South Carolina Highway Patrol, multiple neighboring county sheriff's offices, drone teams, K-9 units, and volunteer fire departments. Well, over 200 people mobilized around a single objective: bring a missing 4-year-old home alive. Former prosecutor April Sampson, who publicly analyzed this case after the arrest became known, offered a read on the timing of that call that reframes the entire night in a way that is difficult to shake once you've heard it. Michelle was, at that exact point in time, only hours or at most a day or two from going into labor with her second child. And when a pregnant woman arrives at a hospital to deliver a baby, medical staff follow a routine, essentially unavoidable line of questioning about any other children she may have at home. That question was coming. It was inevitable the moment she walked through a hospital's doors, regardless of anything else happening in her life. Sampson's assessment was direct and, once you sit with it, genuinely chilling. The 911 call and her reading may have had less to do with launching a genuine search for a missing child and considerably more to do with establishing a documented, official, time-stamped record. Something Michelle could point to at the hospital the moment the inevitable question came. My daughter is missing. I already called the police. It's on file. It's already being handled. That same night, after the search of Javeayah was already fully underway, with deputies working the yard and the surrounding woods under flashlight, Michelle Herring gave birth to a baby girl. Javeayah's sister came into the world while, at that very moment, hundreds of people would soon be out in the July heat combing fields and creek beds for a child who, according to what investigators would determine within days, had already been gone for a full month. By the morning of July 1st, this had stopped being a purely local matter entirely. The FBI's Columbia Field office became involved within hours, bringing in members of its behavioral analysis unit and its child abduction rapid deployment team. Specialists brought in specifically for cases exactly like this one. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known statewide as SLED, joined the effort. So did the South Carolina Highway Patrol, the Aiken Department of Public Safety, the North Augusta Department of Public Safety, and sheriff's offices from Edgefield, Lexington, Kershaw, and Richmond counties. Volunteer fire departments and county emergency management teams rounded out a response that, within days, had grown into one of the largest child search operations the region had seen in recent memory. Search crews covered more than 3,000 acres within the first 72 hours alone, and by the time the operation began winding down its visible footprint, that number had climbed past 5,000. Helicopters flew methodical grid patterns overhead, hour after hour. Drones covered terrain too dense, too remote, or too difficult for ground teams to reach quickly. K-9 units worked the areas closest to home first, tracing sent along the same wooded path Michelle had described during her 911 call. Roadblocks went up around the neighborhood. Deputies went door to door, repeating the same description to anyone who would listen. Pink pajamas, pink beads, braided hair, for years old. A local church, Bethel Baptist, became the unofficial command post for the entire operation, opening its doors before sunrise every single morning to provide food, water, restrooms, and, critically, in South Carolina in early July, air conditioning for crews coming in from the heat after hours in the woods. A digital billboard company donated advertising space across the county to keep Javeayah's photograph in front of as many drivers and as many potential witnesses as possible. One question followed the investigation almost from the very start, and it did not go away quietly. Why wasn't an Amber Alert issued? The sheriff's office addressed it directly and consistently over the following days. The case, as it stood at the time, did not meet the specific federal criteria required to trigger one. Criteria that generally require evidence of an abduction, often involving a vehicle, which investigators did not yet have. Officials also pointed to the genuine risk of flooding an active search zone with untrained volunteers, from the possibility of contaminating physical evidence to the very real danger of well-meaning searchers wandering into the rain. They weren't equipped to navigate safely. That explanation was offered by every indication in good faith. It was also met with sustained public frustration from people who felt that for a missing 4-year-old, absolutely no available tool should have been left sitting on the table, regardless of technical criteria. That debate played out publicly in real time while the search continued around it, and it's worth remembering because it's part of how quickly and how widely this case spread across the country before anyone outside of law enforcement understood what actually happened to Javeayah. Meanwhile, a detail was quietly surfacing on the ground that did not fit the story everyone believed they were searching to confirm. Reporters canvassing the Hillsborough Street neighborhood kept running into the same observation, phrased slightly differently by different residents, but landing again and again in the exact same place. Neighbors hadn't seen Javeayah in a long time. Not days. Weeks, several of them said, or longer still. If that was true, then the entire premise powering a search that now involved hundreds of officers and volunteers, a child last seen playing outside her own home just hours earlier, was already standing on ground that had begun to crack before anyone realized it. And once that single detail surfaces, everything that came before it needs to be looked at again from a completely different angle. By July 3rd, the visible search began to scale back. Publicly, officials said there was no evidence Javeayah had been abducted, and that she may simply have wandered off on her own. That statement, as it turned out, did not reflect what investigators were already quietly working with behind the scenes, in a parallel track running underneath the visible operation the entire time. Because there was a second investigation running throughout this entire period, considerably quieter, and moving in a direction the public would not learn about for several more days. Before either parent was arrested, Javeayah Harris agreed to a phone interview with a local news reporter and later agreed to, then failed to show up for, an on-camera follow-up interview. That phone interview is worth walking through carefully and in detail because when investigators and true crime analysts went back through it after the arrests were made public, several details stood out almost immediately. Javeayah described his day in considerable detail. He said he woke up around 5 o'clock that morning. Said Javeayah had been outside playing while her mother watched over her, on and off, throughout the day. Said he left the house sometime between 6 and 7 to run errands and do laundry, stopping at what he described as 3 separate stores for candy, drinks, and gas along the way. He described going back to check on his clothes at a laundromat located beside a convenience store, then heading out again to another store, describing a somewhat looping, repetitive sequence of stops that was, by his own account, difficult even for him to lay out cleanly in order. He said he was back at the washing machine near the convenience store when he began noticing a heavier-than-usual police presence moving through the area, and that he initially assumed it had nothing whatsoever to do with him. It was not until he turned onto his own street and saw a police truck with a drone deployed overhead that he began to suspect something serious had happened close to home. He said that when he finally arrived and saw the number of officers gathered at the house, his very first thought was that his girlfriend had gone into labor since she was due any day. Then he described the moment he actually learned the truth, that Javeayah was reported missing not that a baby had simply arrived early. Several details from that interview drew close attention almost immediately once analysts and investigators went back through it. The first was linguistic, and it is the kind of detail that shows up again and again in cases exactly like this one. Throughout the entire call, Javeayah consistently referred to his daughter in the past tense. She was friendly. She was respectful. She was a smart kid. On its own, that detail proves absolutely nothing. People in shock and grief, or simply under the weight of an unimaginably stressful situation, often slip into past tense, without meaning anything sinister by it at all, and it would be genuinely unfair to treat verb tense alone as evidence of guilt. But it is the kind of detail that people who follow cases like this one closely tend to notice immediately, because it has surfaced again and again in cases where the story being told publicly and the truth quietly being investigated behind the scenes turned out to be two entirely different things. The second detail was smaller, but it caught investigators' attention for a different reason entirely. When asked how Michelle was holding up throughout all of this, Javeayah described her, in his own words, as a little tore up, given that his daughter was, according to everything being told to him at that point, still missing, and his girlfriend had just given birth under those exact circumstances. Several people who reviewed the interview afterward noted, independently of one another, that the phrase felt oddly restrained, oddly clinical for the situation being described. Most parents living through that exact scenario would likely be described by anyone close to them as something closer to inconsolable. There was a third moment worth sitting with as well, when the reporter conducting the interview asked directly whether Michelle was his wife. Javeayah answered no. She was his girlfriend. That is a small, easy detail to overlook on a first listen. But in a case where every account given by both parents was already quietly under close scrutiny by investigators working the parallel track of this case, small inconsistencies in something as simple as word choice were exactly the kind of thing being carefully cataloged. The reporter and Javeayah arranged to meet in person later that same day for an on-camera interview, one intended to put more information in front of the public and potentially generate new tips. Javeayah never showed up. When the reporter called to follow up and find out what had happened, Javeayah answered, heard who was calling, and hung up the phone. He never gave another interview to that reporter, or, as far as public record shows, to any other news outlet after that point. None of this, taken in isolation, proves anything at all. People behave in ways under trauma that can look identical, from the outside to deception, and this is one of the genuine, uncomfortable difficulties of covering a case like this one honestly. Authenticity and rehearsal can sound remarkably alike in a moment, and the only thing that actually separates them is evidence that nobody watching from home, and frankly nobody covering a case in real time, has access to yet. But taken together, alongside everything else investigators were quietly gathering behind the scenes during those same days, these details became part of a much larger picture. One that was, within roughly 72 hours, about to collapse entirely and reveal something far worse than anyone following the case publicly had allowed themselves to consider. On the morning of July 4th, 2026, Independence Day, a morning that should have belonged to fireworks, cookouts, and lazy summer mornings, Sheriff Marty Sawyer stood at a podium in front of his own staff, representatives from several other law enforcement agencies, and a room full of cameras, and delivered what he would later describe, without exaggeration, as the hardest announcement of his 36-year career in law enforcement. He told the community and the country that the investigation and the evidence gathered over the previous 4 days had led his office to one conclusion. 4-year-old Javeayah Harris was deceased. He said it was the outcome everyone had feared from the moment this search began, and that the community would now have to face that reality together. Then he said the sentence that would come to define this entire case, the one that would be replayed, quoted, and sat with by nearly everyone who has followed it since. He confirmed that on the night the 911 call was made, it was already too late to save her, that at that point, the evidence available to his office supported the conclusion that she had been deceased for approximately 1 month. A month, every helicopter pass over those 5,000 acres. Every K, 9 team working the wooded path behind the house. Every single volunteer who gave up their 4th of July, walking fields and creek beds in South Carolina heat that pushed toward 100 degrees. All of it had been set in motion by a phone call placed weeks after Javeayah was already gone. Both parents were arrested that same morning. Javeayah Harris, 23 years old, was charged with homicide by child abuse. Michelle Herring, 22 years old, was charged with homicide by child abuse and filing a false police report. Both were processed and booked into the Aiken County Detention Center that day. Under South Carolina law, homicide by child abuse carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in prison with a maximum sentence of life. Filing a false police report, charged as a felony violation in this case, carries up to 5 years in prison or a $5,000 fine, or both. Sheriff Sawyer confirmed one additional piece of information that morning that had been quietly circulating the community, but not yet officially addressed on the record. Michelle had given birth to her second child on the same night Javeayah was reported missing. That baby, by every confirmation available, was alive, healthy, and safe, and had been placed into the custody of a family member. Later confirmed to be Jamaria's mother, the paternal grandmother of both children. Whatever else was true about that house on Hillsborough Street, Javeayah's baby sister was at least out of it. The sheriff took a deliberate moment during that press conference to thank, by name, every single agency that had committed personnel, equipment, and resources to a search that his own office already privately knew, by that point, would not end the way everyone gathered it was hoping it would. FBI Special Agent in charge Kevin Moore, present at the podium alongside him, would go on to speak directly to the community as well, thanking searchers for their tireless work and confirming that the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team had been on the ground since nearly the beginning of the search. Officials from SLED, the Highway Patrol, and sheriff's offices spanning 5 surrounding counties were named and thanked individually. So were local fire departments, emergency management coordinators, and the volunteer organizations that had shown up day after day in unbearable heat. Every single one of those people had spent days searching for a living child, unaware that the 2 individuals who had triggered the entire search already knew, with total certainty, that she was never going to be found alive in those woods, because she hadn't been there for weeks. The arrest that morning answered the question of who. What remained, the confessions, the formal warrants, and an active search that was about to shift almost overnight to a location 80 miles away, would begin to answer the far harder, far more disturbing question. What had actually happened inside that house, and what had these 2 people done afterward to make sure no one ever found out? Less than 24 hours after their arrests, both Michelle Herring and Javeayah Harris appeared separately before Magistrate Judge Ronald Thornton on Sunday, July 5th. Neither had legal representation present for these initial hearings. Michelle's hearing came first, held in the late morning. She told the court she was employed by Transcom and earned roughly $1,300 every 2 weeks. Based on that income figure, Judge Thornton determined she made too much to qualify for a court-appointed public defender and would need to retain her own private attorney going forward. Bond was denied outright. The severity of the homicide by child abuse charge, combined with the additional charge of filing a false police report directly tied to that same underlying homicide, placed her case squarely outside anything a magistrate court has the jurisdiction or authority to consider for release. Her bond decision was formally deferred to circuit court, with a ruling expected within 30 days of that hearing. Her first formal General Sessions court appearance was scheduled for September 18th. Jamaria's hearing followed that same afternoon. He told the court he had recently started a new position with a logistics company, but hadn't yet received his first paycheck, leaving the question of his eligibility for a public defender genuinely unresolved in that exact moment. When Judge Thornton asked him the standard procedural question every defendant is asked, "Who else lives in a household with you?" Javeayah answered simply, "His girlfriend." Then, after a brief pause, in a noticeably quieter and softer tone than the rest of his answers, he added 2 more words, "My child." 2 words, spoken softly, in a courtroom where the entire reason he was standing there in shackles was the death of that same child. It did not go unnoticed by anyone present in that room. No further comment was made about it in the moment. The hearing simply continued forward. Bond was denied for Javeayah as well, with his first formal appearance scheduled for September 19th, one day after Michelle's own court date. For both defendants, these initial bond decisions made at the magistrate level were procedural, not final, deferred entirely to a circuit court judge who was expected to rule within 30 days of the July 5th hearings. Until that ruling came down, both Michelle and Javeayah would remain inside the Aiken County Detention Center, held without any possibility of release. The legal process was now formally, irreversibly underway, and the very next day, the documents that would finally lay out in exact legal language exactly what investigators believed had happened inside that home were about to become public record for first time. On July 6, 2026, the arrest warrants were released to the public, and for the first time since this case began, the language investigators had been using behind closed doors became a matter of official, permanent public record. Both warrants cite conduct demonstrating extreme indifference to human life. Language pulled directly, word for word, from the section of South Carolina's criminal code governing homicide by child abuse. That phrase is not boilerplate legal filler. It is a specific, deliberate legal threshold, and prosecutors do not attach it to a warrant unless they genuinely believe they can support it in court with sufficient evidence to survive scrutiny. Michelle's warrant is the more detailed of the two. It alleges that she caused Javeayah's death through abuse or neglect, and that the circumstances of that death met the legal standard for extreme indifference to human life, specifically because she failed to seek medical attention after Javeayah suffered an injury resulting from physical abuse. The warrant places the abuse within the window of May 1st through June 15th, 2026, occurring at the Hillsborough Street residence. It states that Javeayah's body remained inside the home during this period, a stretch of weeks before it was eventually moved elsewhere. And critically, it states that Michelle admitted, in her own words, directly to investigators, that she disposed of Javeayah's remains at a separate location, well outside of Aiken County. Michelle's second warrant, for filing a false police report, states plainly that she reported to the sheriff's office that her daughter was missing and possibly abducted by another person, a report that investigators subsequently determined to be entirely false, once the search itself and follow-up interviews made clear no abduction had ever occurred. Javeayah's warrant carries the exact same underlying charge, but describes a meaningfully different role in what happened. It does not allege that he directly caused Javeayah's injuries himself. Instead, it alleges that he knew what had happened to her, failed to seek medical attention on her behalf despite that knowledge, and actively participated in concealing her death by allowing her body to remain inside the home and by failing to report what had occurred to anyone in authority. Under South Carolina law, that specific combination, knowing concealment paired with deliberate failure to act, is sufficient to bring the same statutory charge, carrying the exact same 20 years to life sentencing exposure as the charge against Michelle. Both warrants state clearly that they were supported not only by both parents' own confessions to investigators, but by additional corroborating physical and digital evidence gathered throughout the investigation, a detail former prosecutor April Sampson highlighted as especially significant when she spoke publicly about the case. Investigators were reportedly able to cross-reference phone location data and cellular records against the exact timeline both parents had described during questioning, and according to Sampson's analysis, those independent records lined up consistently with what the parents had told investigators. That kind of corroboration matters enormously in a case like this one, because it transforms a confession from a single, potentially challengeable piece of evidence into part of a broader, independently verifiable documented record. Evidence that does not depend on either parent continuing to cooperate or standing by what they said once defense attorneys eventually entered the picture. Sampson was also careful, in her public analysis, to draw a distinction that will matter enormously as this case continues moving toward trial. The legal standard required to obtain an arrest warrant is probable cause, meaning investigators only need to demonstrate it was more likely than not that a crime occurred and that these specific individuals committed it. The legal standard required to actually convict someone at trial is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, a substantially higher bar to clear. Once defense attorneys are formally retained or appointed for both defendants, their work will almost certainly include scrutinizing exactly how those confessions were obtained, whether both parents were properly and fully advised of their constitutional rights before speaking with investigators, and whether anything said during those interviews can be legally challenged on procedural grounds. That process has not yet begun in any formal sense. It absolutely will. One additional detail surfaced through independent reporting during the same period, describing screenshots of text messages allegedly sent by Michelle to a family member sometime during the weeks between Javeayah's death and the eventual 911 call, including, notably, what appeared to be an older video of Javeayah playing, shared in a way that made it look as though it had been recorded recently. Law enforcement had not officially confirmed or verified those specific messages as of this recording. But if that reporting is accurate, it suggests a fabrication at the center of this case may not have begun with a phone call to 911 at all. It may have been quietly running for weeks beforehand, through private conversations carefully managed and constructed to keep anyone close to the family from asking the wrong question at the wrong moment too soon. There is a detail from Sheriff Sawyer's own remarks during the height of the active search that is genuinely easy to miss on a first listen, but becomes enormous once you understand everything that came after it. At one point during that search, while cameras were still rolling and hundreds of searchers were still combing through woods and fields, he mentioned, almost in passing, that alongside the visible operation, the one making national headlines, the helicopters and drones and hundreds of exhausted volunteers, there was another team working the case entirely off-site, doing what he described, without further elaboration at the time, only as their job. That is not a small detail. It means that from very early on in this investigation, likely from the first day or two, law enforcement was running two entirely parallel efforts simultaneously. One team was searching in good faith for a living child who might genuinely still be found somewhere in those woods. A second, quieter team was already looking at the people closest to her. When a reporter later pressed Sheriff Sawyer directly on exactly when this case shifted from an active missing person search to a homicide investigation, his answer was careful, measured, and deliberately vague on specifics. He said he hadn't wanted his office to fall behind on anything, which was part why the FBI had been brought in so early in the process, so they wouldn't be forced into playing catch-up if the situation ultimately turned into something far worse than a simple case of a child wandering off. He declined to give an exact date or moment when investigators first determined she wasn't going to be found alive in those woods. What he did confirm when pressed was that once the off-site investigative team determined that she was, in his own words, not there anymore, the entire purpose of the visible search changed. Even before its physical footprint on the ground had begun to noticeably shrink.
It's set for $5,000, but because it's connected to the homicide charge, I'm going to deny bond. So these two are going to be connected together, and a circuit court judge will hear that. So as of this morning.
Yes, we ask that she complies with DSS requirements.
Court, you contact the public defender's office to complete the application process. Court dates, times, and locations will be included in the paperwork that I'm about to give you, so don't try to keep up with anything in your head. For charges that will be heard in General Sessions Court, you have the right to a preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing does not determine if you are guilty or not guilty. It simply confirms if probable cause exists to move forward to trial with the charges that you face. If you want a preliminary hearing, you need to submit the form I will give you within 10 days, and that 10 days starts today. You will get a copy of everything that you sign. Understand that by signing, know that it is not an admission of guilt or anything other than a receipt of the documents as part of this bond hearing process. Please follow the deputy's guidance and sign and initial everywhere that it is highlighted in yellow. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Herring, you've been charged with homicide by child abuse. You understand that charge?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand that if convicted, it carries up 20 years to life in prison? Do you
Yes,
understand that? You've also been charged with filing false police report of a felony violation. Do you understand that?
yes, sir.
It carries up to 5 years in prison or a $5,000 fine. You understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you want to see if you qualify for a court-appointed attorney, or are you going to retain the services? Are you going to retain the services of your own legal counsel?
I can get public assistance.
Okay. So answer a couple of questions for me. Are you employed?
Yes, sir.
And where do you work?
Transcom.
Transcom?
Yes, sir.
Do you get paid weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly?
Bi-weekly.
And on average, what do you typically bring home every 2 weeks?
1,300.
Anybody else live in the household with you?
Yes, sir. The father.
So just one?
Yes, sir.
Does he do anything to contribute to the financial status of the home?
He work at DHL.
Okay. All right, at this time, you make too much money to qualify for a court-appointed attorney.
Okay.
So you're going to need to retain the services of legal counsel on your own. You also have a first court appearance set up for September 18th of this year at 9 a.m. in the main courtroom at the Aiken County Judicial Center, 109 Park Avenue Southeast in Aiken. Right. If you're able to bond out, then you'll need to be there for this first appearance. If you have not bonded out on these charges, the Sheriff's Office will transport you to the courtroom. Does Victim Services have anything they'd like to add to the record this morning?
Yes, we ask that she complies with DSS requirements.
All right. Very good. Is there anyone from law enforcement that is here to put anything on the record? Very well. All right. Ms. Herring, with regards to the homicide by child abuse, it carries 20 years to life if convicted. Based on the severity of the charge and the penalty that it carries, I do not have the authority to set bond. You will have to go before a circuit court judge. The circuit court judge will basically do what I'm doing, but will have the authority to set a bond on you. Sometime within 30 days, you will have that opportunity to go before the circuit court judge. With regards to the filing false police report of the felony violation, that bond would have been set for $5,000, but because it's connected to the homicide charge, I'm going to deny bond. So these two are going to be connected together, and a circuit court judge will hear that. So as of this morning, there is no bond that is set for you. All right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Regardless of how much further searching continued, then he said something that required absolutely no additional framing from anyone covering this case. Something that has stayed with nearly everyone who has followed it since that morning. A sheriff with 37 years of experience in law enforcement. Someone who has undoubtedly seen more than most people ever will over the course of a long career. Said, without exaggeration, that he had never once encountered anything this horrific. He also made a deliberate, entirely public choice about the language he would use going forward. He said he would not refer to Javeayah Harris and Michelle Herring as mother and father, not in that statement. Not anywhere on the official record, not in any capacity connected to this investigation. He said plainly that they had not earned that title, and he was not going to hand it to them. New criminal charges followed immediately, filed that same day. Both Michelle Herring and Javeayah Harris were now facing additional charges of destruction and desecration of human remains, stacked directly on top of the existing homicide by child abuse charges, and, in Michelle's case specifically, on top of the already existing charge of filing a false police report, outside a courtroom that had not yet formally convened to hear any of this new evidence. Something else had already quietly begun. A petition calling for legislation being referred to publicly as Javeayah's Law started circulating widely, describing what advocates characterized as a specific gap in existing child protection systems. One they argued had allowed a situation exactly like hers to go unnoticed and unreported for weeks on end, and calling for stronger, more proactive state-level protections to help close that gap for other children. As of the most recent reporting available, that petition had already gained significant traction online and was actively drawing attention from state-level lawmakers and child welfare advocates alike, while investigators continued working two entirely separate active fronts at once: the reservoir out in Fairfield County and the property back on Hillsborough Street in Aiken. Something else was happening in the community that had absolutely nothing to do with law enforcement at all. It started small, with just a few candles left quietly at the mailbox outside the family's home. Within a matter of days, it had grown into something much larger, a full and constantly expanding memorial. Pink balloons, Minnie Mouse stuffed animals of every size, handwritten notes tucked between flowers, bouquets that kept arriving day after day from people who had never once set foot on that street before this case put it, tragically, on the national map. People drove genuinely significant distances just to be present at that memorial. Some told local reporters they couldn't fully explain, in words, why they felt compelled to come. They had never met Javeayah. They had no personal connection whatsoever to the family. And yet, they simply could not stop thinking about her. Could not go about their normal lives without doing something, however small, to acknowledge what had happened. A local restaurant owner spent the entire morning of July 4th. The same morning Sheriff Sawyer confirmed publicly that Javeayah was gone, quietly preparing dozens of hot meals and personally driving them out to exhausted search crews still working in Fairfield County, later describing the volunteers he found out there as strangers who had given up their own Independence Day for a little girl who was, in his words, part of his community, regardless of whether he'd ever actually met her. Vigils followed across the region with no formal top-down organizer behind them, no official announcement beyond a shared flyer or a post that spread quickly on social media, and hundreds of people showed up anyway, again and again. One vigil held in downtown Aiken ended with attendees walking together as a group all the way to the growing memorial on Hillsborough Street. Another vigil was organized in Union County, a deliberate nod to the family's earlier ties to that community, with attendees specifically asked to bring teddy bears to leave behind. A bicycle giveaway for local children was organized in Javeayah's honor. A local church that had opened its doors to exhausted search crews for the entire preceding week gathered together simply to mark one full week since the case had first broken. Not with any kind of formal service or program, just people who needed somewhere and someone to be together with. None of this outpouring was coordinated from the top down by any official body or organization. It came entirely from ordinary people who saw what had happened to a 4-year-old girl in their community and decided, individually and then collectively, that silence was simply not an option for them. Even if it had been, for 6 devastating weeks, the only option chosen by the 2 adults who were supposed to protect her more than anyone else on earth. As of the most recent reporting available on this case, here's exactly where things currently stand. Michelle Herring, 22, and Javeayah Harris, 23, both remain held inside the Aiken County Detention Center. Neither has been granted bond at any point since their arrests. The charges currently pending against Michelle include homicide by child abuse, filing a false police report, and destruction and desecration of human remains. The charges currently pending against Javeayah include homicide by child abuse and destruction and desecration of human remains. Investigators and prosecutors have both indicated that additional charges remain possible as this investigation continues to develop. First formal court appearances have been scheduled for September, with Michelle's set for September 18th and Javeayah's set for September 19th, with the case ultimately headed towards South Carolina's General Sessions court system. As of the most recent hearings on record, neither defendant had yet formally secured private legal counsel or been confirmed as eligible for a public defender, a matter that will need to be fully resolved well before those scheduled dates arrive this fall. The prosecution's overall foundation, according to former prosecutor April Sampson's public analysis, appears to rest on several distinct pillars working together in support of one another. Confessions given independently by both parents to investigators, phone location and cellular data that investigators were reportedly able to cross-reference successfully against the exact timeline described in those confessions, DNA analysis directly confirming that the partial remains recovered from Cedar Creek Reservoir are biologically consistent with being the offspring of both parents, and physical evidence collected during the formal search of the Hillsborough Street property, combined with witness interviews that help establish, as precisely as possible, the last confirmed point at which anyone outside the household reported actually seeing Javeayah live. That is, by any reasonable measure, a genuinely strong evidentiary position for prosecutors at the still early stage of the case. But Sampson has been consistently clear in every public comment she's made about exactly what comes next in a case like this one. Probable cause is what got these specific warrants signed and these arrests made in the first place. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is a substantially higher legal bar, and it is the actual standard this entire case will ultimately be decided on whenever it reaches trial. Once defense counsel is formally in place for both defendants, expect serious legal challenges to how those confessions were originally obtained, whether both parents were properly and fully informed of their constitutional rights before speaking with investigators at length, and whether anything either of them said during those interviews was given voluntarily, without any element of coercion. Those are entirely standard, entirely legitimate legal questions in any major case built as heavily around confession evidence. And they are, without question, coming as this case proceeds. What is not currently in dispute, as of today, is the DNA evidence itself. What is not in dispute is that partial human remains were, in fact, recovered from the waters of Cedar Creek Reservoir. And what is not in dispute, because it came directly from the sheriff leading this entire investigation, standing at a podium in front of cameras, is that a full and complete recovery of Javeayah's remains is now considered, in his own words, extremely unlikely to ever happen. Javeayah's newborn baby sister remains safe, currently in the custody of her paternal grandmother, and the extended family has understandably asked for privacy as they attempt to navigate all of this together. That request, quite simply, deserves to be honored by everyone following the story from a distance. It's worth pausing here to say something that isn't often said plainly enough in coverage of cases like this one. Javeayah's story, as devastating as it is on its own terms, is not entirely without precedent, and understanding that pattern helps explain why cases like hers so often unfold the exact same way, from the frantic 911 call all the way through to the eventual, quiet unraveling of the story. There have been other cases in recent years that followed an almost identical shape. A child reported missing under circumstances that sound, on the surface, entirely plausible. A massive, sincere, resource-intensive search involving hundreds of volunteers and multiple agencies, all of them operating in good faith. National media attention, a tearful public appeal from a parent, sometimes delivered directly to cameras, and then weeks or months later, a confession that reveals a child had already been gone, in some form, long before the public search for them ever began. What makes cases like this one so uniquely difficult to process isn't just the loss of the child, as unbearable as that loss is on its own. It's the deliberate weaponizing of an entire community's compassion. Every single person who searched those 5,000 acres in Aiken County did so because they genuinely believed, with everything in them, that a living 4-year-old girl might still be found. Every volunteer who handed out water at Bethel Baptist Church. Every K, 9 handler who worked their dog through dense brush in 90-degree heat. Every FBI agent who flew in specifically because a child's life was believed to still be in the balance. Their compassion, their time, and their genuine hope were, according to what investigators now allege, used as cover for a decision that had already been made weeks earlier in silence, inside a house on Hillsborough Street. That is part of what makes Sheriff Sawyer's reaction, and the reaction of nearly everyone who has covered this case since, land as heavily as it does. It isn't only grief for a child none of them had ever met. It's a specific, particular anger of realizing that an entire community's decency had been turned into a tool. There's a great deal this case is already answered in devastating detail through warrants, press conferences, and forensic confirmation. There is still considerably more that it has not. We still don't know, publicly, the precise medical mechanism of Javeayah's death. Only that investigators allege it resulted from repeated physical abuse sustained over a period of roughly 6 weeks. We still don't know for certain whether any prior contact ever existed between the specific family and formal child welfare agencies before June 30th. Unconfirmed reports have circulated online claiming that extended relatives made welfare-related complaints about the family in the past, but none of that has been officially verified by the relevant agencies as of this recording. We still don't know whether anyone outside that immediate household, a neighbor, a distant relative, anyone at all who might have noticed Javeayah's increasingly prolonged absence over those weeks, genuinely suspected something was seriously wrong and chose to say nothing, or whether the isolation this family had quietly built around themselves, moving repeatedly from county to county with few lasting close ties anywhere they landed, simply meant there was, tragically, no one left in A, positioned to notice in time to intervene. That last question is, in a lot of ways, the single hardest one this entire case leaves behind for all of us to sit with, because it doesn't have a clear villain attached to it the way so many of the other questions in this story unfortunately do. It is a systemic question, one this case forces an entire state, and honestly an entire country, to confront. A 4-year-old girl who was, by every single account available to us, verbal, social, and genuinely impossible to overlook in a room, when unseen by anyone outside her immediate household for weeks on end, in a country absolutely full of neighbors, teachers, extended relatives, and community members who care deeply and sincerely about the safety of children. Somewhere in that gap, between a child who should have been impossible to overlook and a formal search that only began after she had already been gone for a full month, there is a difficult, uncomfortable lesson this case is quietly forcing all of us to reckon with. Javeayah Harris was 4 years old. She had pink beads woven carefully through her braids, and a favorite spot beside a chicken coop, where her mother once told a 911 dispatcher she could always reliably be found. She loved Minnie Mouse in that specific, all-consuming, wholehearted way that small children love the things that make them feel most like themselves. She talked easily to nearly everyone she met, trusted people almost instinctively, and greeted the adults around her exactly the way she had been raised to, with genuine respect, without a trace of fear, never once learning, in her short life, that some of the very people closest to her were the ones she should have been most afraid of. She was supposed to become a big sister, within days of everything, in this case, first coming to light. She never once got the chance to meet that sister at all. What actually happened to her over those 6 devastating weeks between May 1st and June 15th, 2026, is something a courtroom will now spend months, quite possibly years, working through in far more granular detail than any of us currently have access to. What happened afterward. The deliberate decision to destroy rather than report, to dispose of rather than grieve, to construct and maintain an elaborate fabricated search rather than simply face what already irreversibly occurred, is something a sheriff with 37 years on the job described, plainly and without any exaggeration whatsoever, as something he had genuinely never encountered before in his entire career. There is no ending available to this update that offers real closure, because the case itself has not reached one yet, not by any measure. September will bring the next set of formal court dates, a trial, Whenever it eventually arrives on the calendar, will bring testimony and physical evidence that none of us currently have access to. And somewhere out in Fairfield County, a reservoir that locals still simply call Stumpy Pond may still, even now, be quietly holding on to the last physical trace of a little girl this entire community searched desperately for, never once knowing, until it was already far too late, that the search itself had begun weeks after it could have possibly mattered. If you have any information whatsoever connected to this case, investigators are asking that it be submitted directly through the appropriate law enforcement channels in Aiken County. Tips can also be directed through the SLED tip line, which remains active and monitored around the clock. This case is not over. The September court dates mark the beginning of the next chapter in this story, not the end of the one we just walked through together. We will be here, following every part of it when it moves forward again, because Javeayah deserves a community and an audience that simply does not look away from her, no matter how difficult the details become. If this story affected you the way it has affected nearly everyone who has worked on it, don't just scroll past it in silence. Leave a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Subscribe right now so you don't miss the very next update the moment new information becomes public. And if there is only one single thing you take away from this entire case, let it be this. The silence surrounding a child in danger is rarely, if ever, as quiet as the people responsible for it desperately hope it will be. Somewhere, someone usually notices, eventually. The only question that ever really matters is whether they find the courage to say something in time. Rest in peace, Javeayah. You were 4 years old, and you deserved every single year of the life you never got to have.